Hello, patchwork friends. In this video, we're going to show you some precision cutting and some precision piecing elements that will help you get that Odette block in order fast. Let's get started. Okay, now here's the goal. This block is really very simple to piece, regardless of the method you have used for cutting. We hope you've all had an opportunity to view our last video where we introduced Odette's block to you, but we wanted you to have a chance to perhaps get the book in front of you and be able to peruse the instructions, determine the method you might prefer to use to execute the block. But my goal today in this video is to show you a couple of choices of how you cut these elements, and then we'll go to sewing those elements. Now, many of you know that I have worked with specialty rulers for quite a few years. This book is written with the instructions for the Odette block with specialty rulers. I have, of course, used my rulers for the demos, but as long as you have a tool that cuts the same element, it does not matter what brand it is. It's perfectly fine to do that. I will also be discussing some of the dies for QUILT that will allow you to do that. And then, of course, we have included the traditional instructions as well. So let's take a look at the elements that actually make up the Odette block. What you can see on the overhead now is a picture of the three tools that I will use to cut the block and the elements that they deliver. So let's first take a look at this half square triangle right here. Now I can cut everything from 0 up to a 7.5 with this. And this tool cuts this element, and this element, obviously out of different size strips. I also can cut my square with this same tool. Then the half rectangle is going to cut this element, and in some cases there's more than one color. And then the bias triangle is going to cut this element. Now, for those of you who love QUILT, this die right here, which is die 13, is the same thing as the bias triangle. Die 3 is the same thing as the half square triangle. Die 3 and die 5 both cut half square triangles. And then I go, well, how did I get that half rectangle? I just simply lay in die 14, which cuts a pair of these little fellows. Now, the one thing you have to be careful about when you're cutting these, and all of the instructions with QUILT and then in the rulers as well, will tell you that you need mirror images of this guy. So I cut my strips right sides together or wrong sides together. So you're going to get a set this way, but both of these will be right side up. So I'm going to need reverse layers. In other words, alternate your layers. And I'll tell you how you figure that out, folks. Cut a bunch and you'll have all lefts and no rights, and you'll go, ah! Should have done a reverser. Now, this little fellow right here is die 16. I'm going to cut this element right here today with a half square ruler, but if you are an QUILT cutter, that cuts this same element, which is a little trick. It's exactly like this fellow. I'm just going to do a little trim on it. So those are the elements that we'll be working with today. Now, I wanted you to see the block in partial construction method. So from the overhead, you can see that I've already assembled some of these elements. So I need to make 4 of these. I need to make 4 sets of these, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 1 center. That's how we're going to build this block. So the very first cut I'm going to make is I'm going to cut myself these squares. I have pre-cut my strip. Now, when I use this ruler, which is a half square triangle ruler to cut squares, I just read the words that's on the ruler, and then I just turn the ruler over where I have a 90 degree in the upper right-hand corner. I'm now going to just trim off that selvage, and then I slide my ruler to the mark that is the size that I cut my strip. So if you'd cut a 3-inch strip, you'd go to the 3. If you cut a 2-inch strip, you'd go to the 2, and on it goes. And there is my squares. So I have cut my squares. Now, to cut my half square triangle, I'm a right-hander. My excess fabric is to my right. I lay my ruler down to where it meets its strip height. I'm going to hold that ruler. I'm going to do cut 1. Now, for those of you who want a little more cutting detail, we have loads of videos on YouTube for how to cut some of these elements. My second cut, I just flip over, and there I am. So now I have all my little half square triangles cut in a size. Now, if I wanted the larger half square triangles, I would just do the same thing. I would just lay my ruler down and I would be ready to cut. Now, I'm sure somebody out there is going to go, what's that cutter you're working with? I will tell you, this is a game changer, I think. It's a Fomori cutter. You can do some research, check with your local quilt shop. I'm sure you can buy them online as well. It is a rotary cutter with a ball bearing. It is a new guy on the block. And because it has that ball bearing in it, it rolls like a dream. So now I've cut my triangles, my half squares, to cut my half rectangles. Now remember, I told you I want lefts and rights. So if I wanted them out of this color, I would just lay my ruler down, make my cut. Now there's a little angle there on the corner that you want to cut off, that little notch. And what I now have is a left and a right. If you had cut them with one side, like all right sides up, you would only have one. If you were to use your QUILT die, both of these look like this guy. So be sure when you cut with QUILT that you have your fabric same sides facing, because that will give you some lefts and some rights. And that's what you want for this. Now I want to cut a bias triangle, and the bias triangle is pretty cut and dried. You just lay down what size your strip is. So if I wanted, one with this little guy right here, I would just lay my ruler down on there, and this height of that strip is what's going to yield me my bias triangle. And I use lots and lots and lots of bias triangles in this. So if cutting that guy, I would just simply lay down like this. And if I cut double, now I'm not worrying about precision so much because I've already pre-cut all my elements. So there is this element. Now, this will give me a chance to show you something. Be careful about this. This is QUILT's die, which is this exact same thing right here. But you'll notice with the QUILT die, let me slide this, the two notches in the corner are cut off, which is fabulous, but you have to bear in mind that that straight notch right there is your top or bottom. If it's real easy to make this guy the top and bottom because this looks like it's an equilateral triangle, it is not. So it is very important if you're using this die, when you start to sew these, that you understand the flat top is the centered, either top or bottom, of your element. I do need some squares, but I showed you how to cut the smaller square, and the larger square you would cut the same way. You would just cut with a larger ruler. And I typically do use strip cutters for cutting all of my squares and preparing my strips for these elements. Now, I've laid out the elements. I'm not going to sew all of this because I'm going to show you how to put a couple together, and then we'll move past that. Now, I want you to notice that this unit right here, which is this guy, is really the same thing as this one with its corner cut off. In previous writings, you probably would have seen this as a connector where you laid a corner on there, and then you cut, like I laid a square down, sewed through the middle, folded back, and I would get that same thing where I would just sew a connector. I have figured out that it is easier to clean this up as I go. So all I do is I have given you the sizes that you would cut off. I still cut a half square triangle for this when I'm using ruler method, and I would slide in and take that base of that previously used connector off, and I would get this. Had I used the QUILT die, it's a separate cut altogether. When I'm using rulers, everything gets cut like this half square triangle, and then I cut the corners off. Could you do connectors? Of course you could, but it's just, to me, this is cleaner. And as we sew, I'll show you the reasons that I prefer that. So we're going to be making this element, 4 of these, and 1 of these, and we're ready to go. So when it comes to my presser foot, I want to be sure that I have a 1/4 inch foot. In my case, it's the 37 foot, which is the exact 1/4 inch. I want a straight stitch throat plate, which has that teeny opening that's just like your needle and not the wide opening for a zigzag stitch. Those are the 2 most important things to me for accurate patchwork, regardless of brand that you are working on. So make sure your machine is set up this way for the optimum results. So I've set my machine up for what I prefer. Now, this is my choice of how I like to sew. My machine tells me which foot I have on, which is the 37. It also, so it's right there. Oops, let's put that on. And then it also, I have adjusted my presser foot pressure down to 46 because I like the way that piece is a little bit better. One of the things that I love about this machine is it has everything I need to know right here. So I have selected my straight stitch. I have selected my 37 patchwork foot. I have made the decision to adjust my presser foot pressure because I like it with the thinner cotton. I like it a little bit less, and that's always debatable. I also have asked it to remind me that yes, I have the straight stitch throat plate on, so if for some reason I would hit a decorative stitch, I can't break a needle because it's going to stop that for me. So those are just part of the reasons that this is such a pleasure to sew on. And I'm aware that not everyone in the world has this, but one of the things that I like to make you aware of is if you own it, these are things you should be using because that's what's going to make your life a little bit easier in construction. To begin with, I'm going to construct the corner unit, which is 1 large half square, 2 small half squares, and 1 square. Because I've cut these with rulers, I have 2 points and 2 flat tops. Now, it doesn't really matter, but for ease of sewing, when I have cut with a ruler, I am always going to put this guy on this one and go to my machine. So it's going to look like this. And because when it does, my needle is going to come off right there at that point. Now, if you had cut with QUILT, you would have 2 flat tops. I know people who actually like to go ahead and fold this guy up, cut that corner off, now you've got 2 flat tops. When I make this unit, I prefer this method. So I'm going to go to the machine. Now, those of you who know me, my machine just loves to sew. It'll start sewing with nothing in it, but what I love to do is I like to have a leader or an ender, a starter, a stopper, a tail, or whatever you want to call it, because now I'm ready to stitch. So I'm going to go to my machine, and for those of you who sew on this brand or other brands that have a freehand system and you aren't using it, I now have 2 hands that are busy. My third hand is my knee. And I can now raise my presser foot, go straight into my needle, drop at my 1/4 inch, and I'm going to just sew across there. In this pattern, we have instructed you to press all of your seams open. You can be the decider of this, but I will tell you that your life's going to be a little bit happier if you just take the time. You don't need to go to the iron. You just need to finger press that seam open. Then when I put this next one on, all I'm going to do is lay my previously sewn unit on top of that unit. Now, normally, just so you know, I'd be sewing 4 or 5 elements at once, so I wouldn't use this starter and stopper very often. But because of filming, we're going to do it this way. And here's what I want you to see. This is so important. When I come off right there, do you see how I'm smacking that valley right there? In order to have an accurate 1/4 of an inch sewn, I had to, of course, cut a 1/4 of an inch, but you have to sew a 1/4 of an inch. So you can't be a little heavy or a little light. You can't, in my mind, you cannot do almost a scant. I just sew an accurate 1/4, and this is where I come off, smack in the middle of that. I'm going to just finger press that open, and I'm going to clean these up. Now, remember, if you cut this with QUILT, these would have already been cut. So that unit looks like this when it is sewn, right there. Now, what I'm going to do is pick up the larger half square triangle. I have 2 flat tops, but I have a flat top and a point. If I wanted 2 flat tops, it's pretty easy. Just fold that up and crack it off. I don't really feel the need to. So when I lay this one on top of there, I am right there. So I'm going to sew this way. Here's what we've got. I need 4 of those. And let's lay this one aside. So we've done 2 small half squares, a large half square, and a corner square. And we need 4. Now, this is the unit that I need to make that started its life out as a half square triangle, and then I trimmed it, and I'm going to re-add a triangle in lieu of making a connector. If you are using QUILT, this would be a pre-cut element, and this would be a pre-cut element. All the flat tops would be there, and to sew it now, the only thing I do is I just simply lay this down, and this is where I love my stiletto. And there's 1,000 on the market. This By Annie is my favorite. Whatever your favorite is or what your local shop carries, that helps me kind of maneuver to the machine. I'm going to take a bite. Then I'm going to, again, use this. And now we need to make 4 of these. So when I come in here, I've already taken my square, put 2 on, and now I'm ready to put 1 on this unit. So all I'm going to do now is simply put that on to that side, and of course it's still going to need another one. Again, notice that this is where my stiletto and my freehand system really come in handy. Then I'll just simply get this guy right here, and all I've got to do is sew down that line. See where I come off on that point? That is so important. If you start and you see that you're not going to come off on that point, you might as well stop and fix it, because you're going to have to deal with it at some point. Now, this spiky unit is the next unit that we're going to build, and it's probably the most complicated to sew because it's made up of 5 units, 3 bias triangles, and 2 half rectangles, a left and a right. Now, I also want you to be aware of something. We've turned the light down on the machine because the camera reacts a little bit more with this light is bright enough, folks, to go, I don't know, hunting something at night if you wanted to.
I'm hunting weapons.
But we've turned that down, and I know many of you probably go, I didn't know I could do that. All I do is go into my machine, and I go to my machine, and then I go to the light, and now I can adjust all of this. So I have it all the way down from there to there. So you need your sunglasses almost, but just know that you have the ability to do that. And so for those of you who are out there going, gosh, that's not a very good light on that on that machine. Please, I almost, like I said, need sunglasses on when I sew it. It's so bright. If I were going to build a true bias rectangle unit, which has 2 of the half rectangles and 1 bias triangle, I sew it a little different. But as I've made quite a few of these, I have found it is easier if I sew these 3 units first. So in the case I've chosen, my color, my center bias triangle is dark. My 2 on the side is light. I have found this to be the easiest method to sew this for me. When I pick this up, I've got a flat top and a point, and when I slide this unit right there, that's where I'm going to start sewing. Now, if you were cutting other methods, like with QUILT, that point would already be removed. I'm going to go to my machine, and then if you look, and I'll show you with my stiletto now, I'm actually going to just come straight down there. And then I'm going to go ahead and come out of the machine just to show you this. I like to just open that with my nail. Now, I know a lot of people go, oh, I have to go to the iron. This is bias. I'd avoid the iron cost here. And I found if I just do that and then just walk across it gently in the air, I've got that about as tight as I need it to be. Now I need to put this guy on. I normally like the large unit on top, and I can do that because see how those 2 points line up right there? But I also like coming off on that one and starting back this way. I think it's a choice. It's whichever way seems to be the most comfortable for you. So I would just go right there, take a bite. Now here, because my points are on, can you see how that point and that point are spot on? And now that's kind of a guide for me. Now, as I approach this, be very careful that when you come off smack in that valley, because that's what you're going to need to have. And we'll just come out like this. Here's then is the same unit. I would just do this. Now I have pre-sewn a unit and already had it pressed. So you can see that there's my 3 elements that I need. Now what I need is my left and my right half rectangle. It doesn't really matter, I don't think, which one you pick up first, but when you do, notice that notch, when you cut either with the rulers and or QUILT, this is off. That's my starting point right there. So I'm going to come in. Now here again, the reason I sort of kind of don't like to pre-trim all those points, you see how that point's kissing that point? So when I come off here, I'm right in that valley. I would have this, and then I would just need to put the other side on, same way, and I end up with that finished unit. I have pressed all of these units because all of my bias elements are controlled. So I went to the iron, pressed everything open, and now I'm ready to join a row. So I'm going to put, I don't think it really matters whether you put the left side on or the right side on. It's all personal. Whatever you do, be consistent in the way that you work. I typically would pick up my right unit first, and then I take a look at the units to see, does it matter which one lives on the top? And in all honesty here, it really doesn't. So I'm probably going to start sewing, and you know I like a little leader in there, not because my machine doesn't. I just don't like to have to trim all those threads off. So I've got that even. I'm going to go to the machine, take a stitch or two. Then I take a look here. Now I've already trimmed, or this guy was trimmed. So see that little knot, that little point? If I just get that off, now I'm flush. and it's easy to march across there. And my machine is quite happy sewing this. The stiletto to me is another hand. The stiletto is not a necessary item. It's just, I just sort of kind of like that I don't have to get as close in on the needle, period. Then I'm going to take that out. Then I'm going to do the exact same thing. Well, that's pretty dang good. Look at that point. Pick this up. Now I'm going to sew this one in the opposite direction just to show you that I don't think it really matters. I'm just going to get that little point off because I believe it's cleaner. And go to the machine, into the freehand system. Gives me a little bit of a lift there. Now, I have already sewn 2 of the side units to my center unit prior to us sewing that last unit, and I had already made 1 complete long row. So now I'm row 1, row 2, and row 3 in my construction. So it doesn't matter, again, put whichever side on. Now, this is the unit I just sewed because I finger pressed that. Now what I'm going to do is pick these up, and then this is where I think you have a decision about which unit lives on top. I typically, there's 1 more point here than there is down here. So I'm going to go with this fellow on top where I can spot that center a little bit easier. I can sew it both ways, but I think this has less room for error. So I'm going to pick this up now, and let's go back to the machine. Okay, now I've decided to put my larger unit with more points on tops. So there is, I'm going to start. Now, I know many people like to have a pin there, and a pin there, and a pin there. I'm going to let you make up your mind, but I'd like to be able to do this. And if there's all those pins in there, I can't spot check anything. The very first thing I want to do is make sure that that seam and that seam meet each other right there. That's all I need. I don't need a pin now. I just need to sew to that stiletto. Stop. Now you got this little contrary guy. Now, I've sewn enough that I know there's a 1/4 of an inch to that 1/4 of an inch. But I can, do you see it without any pins in? Do you see how my positioning that I almost truly can force that guy right there, but pin if you feel like it's easier for you. Stop. Come back and double check where this fellow's going to be. And look at that. He's going to line up right there. Now I'm going to deal with this one right here. And I'm real careful because all these little points in there, when I get right here, and I'm going to stop when I get right to that point. Right there is where I want to be, and you want to make sure that stiletto does not get under that needle, or you will have a surprise. Then ask me how I know about that. Now I'm going to come back and take a look at this one right here. Stop. Now see how much flexibility I have? I want to make sure I'm good here. I want to make sure that snugs right there. Now you're used to nesting your seams when you press to one side, but when you press open, it's a little bit more contrary. I tell you, folks, take a look. Take a look. Take a look. And I didn't pin. If you feel the need to pin, now this one's looks iffy. but because there's a lot of white in this, and this is a good opportunity to discuss color, because I just picked out, this is my new fabric line Radiance, and I just chose a piece, but because there's a lot of cream in there, when that cream falls into that corner, and this is cream, it becomes an issue. Obviously, I'm not going to make a bunch of these. I just cut what was in front of me at that point. So now I'm at this point, all I've got to do is put this side on and we're ready to go. Now you notice I did this one the opposite just to show you that it's still lining up right here. I've still got to line this guy up. This guy I know is 1/4 of an inch, so as long as I adhere to that 1/4 of an inch, I'm going to be fine, but I am going to cross-check this little guy right here. Take a look. On the money, on the money, on the money, on the money. There you go. So there's our block, not pressed. So I haven't pressed those the opposing seams, and those now need to be pressed to really make sure that my block is going to be crisp and flat. When I pieced this particular block, because of just the confusion of cutting it and sewing it on camera, I only chose 3 fabrics. I could use 4 fabrics. I could even really use 5 fabrics. But just from the sake of working with it, I didn't. But we're going to show you some blocks that are different, that are colored a little bit different. The goal on picking this quilt, in my mind, is what's your fabric choices? What have you got in front of you? What do you love? What are you going to do with this? As you look through the book, you'll see that we've given you settings for 3-block table runners. We've shown you how to do 5 blocks with an alternate block in the center. We've even given you a medallion setting option. So I think your first choice was learning how to cut it and how to sew it. Then you get into your actual designing. And we're going to do a couple more videos where we talk about settings and some of the alternate blocks and other decisions you might make. As you look at our quilts and you try to decide which method are you going to use for construction, we have listed below anything we've talked about, specialty rulers, wherever you decide to shop. I encourage you to check with your local quilt shop first, because their goal is to try to provide what you need. And we know that not everyone has a quilt shop in their backyard. You'll do whatever you need to do to find the product. But I hope you have fun playing with the Odette block. Our goal is to do another couple of videos on the settings, but we first wanted you to be confident in how you would construct it. Please feel free to comment like, that made no sense, Kay. I have no clue. Where will I find those rulers? All of those things we will try to address. I would encourage you to go back and look at some of our previous YouTubes, because we've tried to cover all of these different techniques not related to the Odette block. Bear in mind that what I sew on, what I cut with, and what I prefer is not necessarily what you prefer. My goal is to try to get you to do the cleanest work you can with the least amount of effort with the product you have on hand. And you may have to do a little futzing. Some people love to starch their fabric. Some people love to iron as they go. I just prefer to get a clean result, and I'm not overly fussy about how you go about it, but I believe everybody has the ability to sew accurate. Work with your equipment. If you need to, go to your local quilt shop and say, I can't make this work. Show me how to do this. They're your best friend when it comes to this sort of thing. So we hope we've inspired you to make yourself some Odette blocks. We'll be back again with some design settings. Have a great day. Happy sewing. Bye-bye.